The galactic map shifted without sound, without warning, without even the courtesy of a detectable disturbance, as if the universe simply decided to exhale and rearrange itself while no one was looking. It began as a faint discrepancy deep in the archives of the Orion Cartographic Relay, a place where star positions were so meticulously catalogued that even the life cycle of a distant red dwarf was tracked with obsessive precision. At 02:14 Galactic Standard, a low-level AI flagged a mismatch between the map's historical coordinates and the latest automated scan. The AI attempted to correct the error. The error grew. Lines flickered, boundaries distorted, and the entire display quaked as if some cosmic hand was smearing the galaxy like wet paint across glass. Then, in a single synchronized instant across thousands of navigation networks, the map redrew itself in cold, unyielding precision. Earth was gone. Not destroyed. Not obscured. Not shifted by drift or orbital decay. Gone. Teleported, relocated, extracted cleanly from its cosmic nest and moved somewhere else entirely. Where soul once burned in the familiar embrace of the Orion arm, there remained only an echo, a gravitational afterimage, like the fading warmth of a body that had just stood in the room. Scientists who had spent their lives studying stellar drift felt their minds hollow with denial as their instruments swore the impossible had happened. Centuries of star charts, ancient maps etched by civilizations long vanished, newer holographic mappings woven by machine learning, all of them updated at once, all reporting the same truth. Earth no longer occupied its ancestral coordinates. The first to react were the automated defense arrays scattered across the galactic rim. Their systems interpreted the sudden disappearance as a catastrophic attack and initiated emergency protocols, flooding council channels with encrypted warnings. By the time organic minds began to wake and respond, the situation had already spiraled into panic. The Verax Dominion accused the Ularan Communion of deploying an experimental relocation weapon. The Communion, equally terrified, blamed the Keth Coalition for tampering with space-time. Finger-pointing spread faster than clarity, and for a brief, dangerous moment, 3 of the largest militaries in the galaxy prepared to mobilize in response to a crime no one understood. Yet humans, waking to skies they could not recognize, reacted in an entirely different way. Astronomers rushed to telescopes, blinking in disbelief as constellations they had known since childhood appeared warped, misaligned, replaced by strangers. The familiar jewel of Orion was fractured, its hunters and shields and swords broken by impossible angles. Instead, new clusters, never catalogued, never named, glittered overhead. Astrophysicists frantically recalculated Earth's position, but every equation collapsed under the same result. Earth had been displaced by an inconceivable distance, far beyond any propulsion engine humanity had ever imagined. At first, global networks braced for panic, but the panic never came, not in the way the galaxy expected. Humans did panic, but only briefly, only enough to let the shock settle. Then, as if governed by some stubborn ancestral instinct, they grew angry. Humanity had endured wars, extinctions, collapses, invasions, pandemics, and the cold indifference of space itself. They could adapt to new stars if they had to. But no force had the right to simply pick up their world and place it somewhere else like a misplaced tool. What unsettled the galaxy most was not Earth's movement, but what the movement did not leave behind. There were no space-time fractures, no wormhole remnants, no tachyon trails or gravitational shear. The relocation was clean, surgically precise, executed with mastery that surpassed even the theoretical limits of elder technology. It had happened without any warning or detectable energy signature, a relocation so flawless that physicists whispered it might not have been a movement at all, but a re-indexing of spatial coordinates themselves. Council scientists soon discovered the second horrifying truth. Earth had not been moved deeper into known space or shifted to the safer periphery of mapped starfields. Instead, it had been repositioned on the knife-edge border of a region so feared, so avoided, that most civilizations refused even to chart it. The silent expanse. A cosmic void, 20,000 light-years across, cold and motionless, where probes vanished without trace, where energy readings dropped to zero, where no civilization had ever returned from once entering too deep. Legends whispered that the expanse was not empty, but waiting. For what? No one could agree. And now, Earth sat at its frontier, as if deliberately placed there. Alien leaders recoiled from the realization. An unknown power capable of relocating an entire star system had not destroyed humanity. It had repositioned them, placed them, chosen them. The implications rippled through every council chamber, every fleet command center, every quiet religious enclave across the galaxy. Because if Earth had been moved, then someone had moved it. And that someone had done so with the gentleness of a god and the precision of an engineer, who understood the universe not as a physical space, but as a structure they had personally built. While the galaxy trembled in the face of that realization, humanity looked up at their new sky with a strange mixture of dread and wonder. They did not yet know who had touched their world, or why. They only knew one truth, one that echoed across Earth, Moon, and every human colony as telescopes recalibrated and starships prepared for launch. Earth had been moved, but humanity would not be moved lightly. The first concrete evidence that Earth's movement was no accident came from the oldest human-made object still wandering the cosmos, Voyager 1. Decades past its designed mission, it had become little more than a drifting archive of humanity's infancy, its golden disk spinning quietly through the void. Yet when scientists in the Sol Observatory intercepted its faint signal, they found something wholly unrecognizable. The data was layered, intricate, and seemingly alive, pulsing with a cadence that mirrored the rhythms of human thought itself. Dr. Lyra Vance, who had devoted her life to deep space telemetry, was the first to perceive the pattern buried beneath the raw signal. It was not an echo of Voyager's own programming. It was an imprint, a resonance, a communication intended for human minds. And in that moment, she realized that Earth's relocation had been deliberate. Someone or something had moved them. And now, through the smallest probe ever launched, they were speaking. The initial attempts to decode the message using conventional algorithms failed completely. The patterns were multidimensional, weaving temporal frequencies with quantum entanglement in ways no human or alien technology had ever attempted to parse. Yet as Vance and her team delved deeper, a strange phenomenon occurred. The message seemed to respond to their understanding. Each time they interpreted a fragment correctly, the pattern would shift subtly, as though guiding them, teaching them. It was not a weapon. It was not a trap. It was an invitation, a pulse of recognition that humans, of all the species in the galaxy, were the intended recipients. Simultaneously, deep space telescopes began to register anomalies in the silent expanse. What had been believed to be empty space, a region beyond the mapped edges of the Orion Arm, where probes had vanished, where starlight bent strangely and gravity fluctuated without reason, began to shimmer with impossible geometry. Massive structures, barely perceptible at first, slowly coalesced out of the darkness. They were enormous, crystalline forms, angular yet harmonious, arranged with a precision that dwarfed the largest orbital engineering projects in human or alien history. And every line of these constructions seemed to point toward Earth's new location, as if the system had been waiting, quietly, for the humans to arrive. The implications sent shockwaves through humanity's governments. Militaries went on high alert, ready for an invasion of incomprehensible scale. Scientists and philosophers debated endlessly, their debates punctuated by trembling revelations that Earth had not only been moved, but repositioned on the threshold of a region no one had survived to explore. Even ordinary citizens, tuning in to the live feeds of telescopic images, experienced a collective shiver of awe. There was something in the pattern of the silent expanse that spoke to an instinct older than fear or reason, an instinct that humanity belonged there. Within hours, the global consensus emerged. They were not being attacked, they were being guided. The structures, the pulse from Voyager, and the sheer impossibility of Earth's relocation all pointed toward one undeniable conclusion. Someone, or something, wanted humanity at this edge, and they had orchestrated it with meticulous care. Humanity's first exploratory fleet was hastily assembled, with ships retrofitted for the unknown physics of the expanse. The Daring Light, a human vessel famed for endurance and exploration, was chosen as the lead ship. Its crew included the brightest minds in astrophysics, exocartography, and quantum mechanics, each sworn to a mission unprecedented in human history: enter the silent expanse, determine the nature of the structures, and, if possible, establish contact with the intelligence responsible for moving Earth. As the fleet crossed the boundary into the expanse, the known rules of space began to bend. Distances warped subtly, light refracted at strange angles, and sensors flickered with impossible readings. Stars appeared displaced or layered, as if the region existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But the human fleet did not falter. Instinct, persistence, and stubbornness, traits honed over millennia, propelled them forward. Humans, after all, were survivors. And when confronted with the incomprehensible, they did not retreat, they advanced. Inside the command deck of the Daring Light, Captain Rourke watched the first glimpse of the crystalline forms emerge from the darkness. The shapes were enormous, taller than mountains, longer than entire continents, and yet they radiated a strange elegance, a sense of design not meant to intimidate, but to communicate. The fleet's instruments began picking up the same pulses that Voyager had transmitted. The signal now filled the human ships like a living organism, threading through every console, every neural uplink, every augmented mind aboard. For a brief moment, fear gripped the crew, but it was overpowered by wonder, a recognition that humanity had found a presence that had been waiting for them across the void for untold millennia. Dr. Vance's voice broke the silence, trembling with awe. "They're expecting us. They know we're coming." No one doubted it. The pulse, the relocation, the waiting structures, all indicated intent. Humanity had been summoned to the silent expanse, brought not as pawns, not as curiosities, but as participants in something vast and ancient. And while the rest of the galaxy trembled at the implications, humanity, true to form, did not hesitate. They would explore, they would learn, they would confront the impossible. Because when Earth had been moved overnight, one truth became clear to every human alive. The universe had recognized them, and it had chosen them. The human fleet entered the silent expanse like explorers stepping into a dreamscape, but this was no ordinary frontier. Space itself behaved differently here. Gravity waves shifted subtly, not in predictable arcs, but in patterns that suggested intention, as if the fabric of reality was aware of each vessel and adjusted itself accordingly. Light bent along unseen geometries, creating illusions of stars folding in on themselves, paths that led nowhere yet somehow aligned perfectly with the course of the fleet. The crew of the Daring Light felt it immediately. This was a region alive, or at least responsive, not in any way that humans had previously defined as sentient, but in ways that challenged their very perception of existence. Captain Rourke stood on the bridge, gripping the rail with white-knuckled resolve. "Keep formation. Sensors on full. Proceed slowly. Nothing touches the fleet without my command." But even as he spoke, the instruments flickered. Readings of distance, mass, energy, and even time itself became unreliable. Stars that should have been light years apart seemed to overlap. Temporal readings varied by minutes between different consoles, and yet, paradoxically, all crew members felt a synchronized heartbeat of the expanse, subtle, pervasive, guiding. The crew began murmuring in awe and disbelief, realizing that the region was not merely an empty void, it was a network, a lattice of patterns and structures that seemed to recognize their presence. Then the first construct appeared. It rose like a monolith from the nothingness, crystalline and immense, its surface refracting the starlight into spiraling geometries of color and motion. Its edges were impossible, simultaneously sharp and fluid, defined yet diffused, as if matter itself had been taught a new way to exist. Every sensor aboard the fleet went into overdrive, yet failed to capture its essence. Attempts to scan it with conventional energy beams returned incomprehensible interference, as if the object itself rejected measurement. The fleet held position in silent reverence. Humans had never encountered anything like this, not during first contact, not during interstellar exploration, not even in simulation. This was beyond physics, beyond engineering, beyond imagination. A subtle hum began to fill the ships, resonating through hulls and neural uplinks alike. It was faint at first, barely perceptible, but soon it became a pulse, steady, rhythmic, and almost alive. Crew members instinctively connected the hum to the Voyager 1 signals, realizing that this was the same intelligence that had moved Earth, the same presence that had waited across the eons. Unlike conventional communication, the pulse did not speak with words. Instead, it wove comprehension directly into human thought. It did not need language, for the mind of humanity, collectively, was attuned to patterns, capable of interpreting intention in its rawest form. Knowledge, concepts, warnings, and even faint emotions threaded themselves into consciousness, and every human aboard the fleet felt simultaneously exposed and understood. Dr. Lyra Vance described it as seeing the universe from the inside out. She felt patterns of stellar formation, quantum probability, and a folding of space-time as tangible threads she could trace with her mind. She perceived paths through the expanse not as coordinates, but as intentions, like trails deliberately left for humanity to follow. The constructs ahead were not obstacles, they were beacons, guides, and, in some subtle way, tests. The intelligence behind them did not speak of hostility. There was no malice, no threat, only recognition, a kind of silent greeting that resonated with something ancient embedded deep in human nature. Humanity, it seemed, had been anticipated, prepared for, and welcomed here. As the fleet advanced further into the expanse, the constructs multiplied. Monolithic towers stretched for thousands of kilometers, forming lattice networks that intersected and intertwined like the synapses of a galaxy-sized brain. Light flowed along these lattices in precise sequences, shifting, splitting, and recombining in patterns that suggested thought, memory, and calculation. The human crew began to perceive a rhythm underlying the chaos, a hidden order that connected every construct to the others and to Earth itself. It was as if the region had been waiting for humanity, lying dormant until the species had evolved to the point of comprehension. Captain Rourke noted the change in the crew. Fear gave way to awe, and awe to determination. They were encountering a power older than most civilizations, intelligence older than the galaxy's oldest stars. Yet it did not intimidate humanity in the way conventional weapons or threats might. Humans had always thrived in the face of the impossible. They had crossed oceans, endured plagues, survived extinction-level events, and yet pressed forward, stubborn, adaptable, unbroken. And now, confronted with structures older than any human reckoning, they did what humans always did. They explored. They advanced. By the time the fleet reached the first full ring of crystalline towers, the pulse of intelligence intensified. Individual thoughts merged subtly with collective comprehension, and the crew understood without doubt humanity had been brought here not to observe, not to serve, but to participate. This region, this silent expanse, had been designed as a stage for them, a place where outlier species could grow, learn, and shape the universe in ways the creators intended. Earth's relocation, the Voyager signal, the geometries of the expanse, all pointed to a singular conclusion: humans had been chosen, deliberately, and now it was time for them to step into the role that awaited. Dr. Vance whispered across the comms, almost reverently, "They know we're here. They've been waiting for us." Captain Rourke nodded silently, eyes fixed on the horizon of impossible constructs. Humanity had crossed the threshold. They were no longer merely observers of the galaxy. They were participants in an ancient design, standing at the edge of the frontier in a place the universe had reserved for them alone. The silent expanse was no longer a void of terror. It was a proving ground, a home, and a challenge all at once. And as the fleet pressed onward, Earth's displaced position ceased to feel like an anomaly. It became the beginning. As the human fleet advanced deeper into the silent expanse, the construct's resonance became impossible to ignore. It was no longer a simple pulse. It was a symphony of intention, patterns interweaving across vast distances with the precision of thought itself. The crew of the Daring Light could feel it in their bones, as if the expanse were breathing through them, syncing its rhythm with humanity's. Every instrument, every sensor, every neural uplink aboard the ships transmitted the same message: the humans were expected, recognized, and anticipated. The realization struck every officer and scientist with profound clarity. Earth had not been moved to a random frontier. It had been relocated to the heart of a region specifically prepared for them. The first explicit communication arrived not as sound, but as comprehension. It flowed into the minds of the crew simultaneously, like a current that connected each individual to a greater network. It revealed fragments of knowledge older than the galaxy, but filtered so that humans could understand without being overwhelmed. The constructs, the pulsing light, the Voyager 1 signals, all converged into a singular awareness: humans were outliers. Not errors, not accidents, but designed deviations meant to survive, adapt, and evolve beyond expectation. They had grown in the wrong part of the galaxy, in ordinary space, where survival was far from guaranteed. Yet they had thrived. Their improbable endurance had been observed across eons, and now the silent expanse, once a dormant experiment of ancient creators, had been reactivated. Humanity was being restored to its intended place. The crew witnessed the next phenomenon as the constructs rearranged themselves subtly. Massive crystalline spires shifted in unison, forming interconnected networks that stretched like arteries through the expanse. Light cascaded along these conduits, forming intricate patterns that no sensor could fully map. But the human mind, collectively, intuitively perceived the logic behind the patterns. They were not defensive, they were instructive. They showed flows of energy, pathways of influence, threads of probability, and even glimpses of possible futures. The expanse itself was a living educational system, a realm designed to nurture and challenge species capable of exceeding the ordinary. Humanity had passed its first threshold simply by surviving and evolving long enough to reach this place. Captain Rourke, staring out from the bridge at towers that stretched farther than any imagination could conceive, realized that humanity's role here was not passive. This was not a museum or a tomb of ancient knowledge. The expanse was a proving ground, a network of reality carefully designed to interact with the consciousness of those who entered. Every crew member began to feel subtle changes in perception. The passage of time altered in personal rhythm. Thought patterns expanded to accommodate unfamiliar logic, and memory itself seemed to integrate with the surrounding constructs. It was not invasive, it was symbiotic. The expanse did not impose its rules, it invited understanding. The intelligence behind the expanse revealed itself slowly, indirectly, not as a single voice or being, but as a presence threaded into every shard of crystalline geometry, every harmonic pulse, every quantum fluctuation. It spoke not through words, but through comprehension. Humanity's history, biology, and improbable survival were acknowledged as essential data points. Every failure, every triumph, every leap of adaptation became part of a greater narrative the expanse had been weaving for eons. The voice conveyed no judgment, no expectation of obedience. It only recognized that humans had reached the point where their species could interact meaningfully with the broader design of the galaxy. Dr. Lyra Vance was the first to articulate the truth aloud, though her voice carried across the fleet with a strange clarity. We've been anticipated. We were meant to be here, right at this edge of the universe. The words rippled through the command decks like a mantra. No one doubted it. The evidence was overwhelming. Earth's movement, the Voyager signals, the synchronized activation of the constructs, all of it confirmed that humanity's presence was not an accident, but a restoration, a deliberate placement within an environment uniquely suited to test and nurture their abilities. As they ventured farther, the fleet witnessed phenomena that challenged every assumption about life, physics, and consciousness. Energy flows formed lattice-like patterns across vast distances, connecting stars, asteroids, and the constructs themselves. Probability fields shifted in ways that allowed humans to perceive multiple potential futures simultaneously, giving the fleet glimpses of paths they might take without determining the outcomes. It was an intelligence operating at the scale of a galaxy, yet it engaged with them personally, understanding their curiosity, their fear, and their resilience. The fleet encountered the first tangible interaction when a crystalline conduit extended a visible bridge toward the daring light. It was not a weapon, nor a portal, nor a machine. It was an invitation. The expanse, in its slow, deliberate way, was offering humanity a means to explore its structure from within, to become participants rather than observers. The crew understood instinctively this was a rare opportunity, possibly a singular chance, to step into a living system older than most civilizations, where intelligence, matter, and consciousness intertwined seamlessly. Captain Rourke issued the order to advance. Humanity's ships moved forward, bridging the space between themselves and the crystalline structure. The pulse of the expanse intensified, merging subtly with the crew's neural networks. For the first time, humans felt the scale of what they had been summoned to. This was not merely exploration. It was integration. Humanity, improbable and defiant, was now part of a cosmic design that demanded understanding, adaptation, and courage. And as the fleet pressed deeper into the silent expanse, Dr. Vance whispered to herself and anyone who could hear, "We've arrived. Not by luck, not by chance, but because we were always meant to be here." The words resonated across the ships, echoing in every mind aboard. Humans had crossed a threshold that no other species dared enter. They were no longer just inhabitants of a planet or a system. They were participants in the living, breathing architecture of the galaxy itself. The deeper the human fleet ventured into the silent expanse, the more the boundaries between thought and reality began to blur. The crystalline constructs, immense beyond comprehension, began to resonate not only with the fleet, but with Earth itself. Signals pulsed along invisible lines that connected every living human to their homeworld, threading through oceans, forests, cities, and deserts alike. People across the planet sensed the subtle shift, not consciously at first, but instinctively. Farmers paused in their fields, astronomers lifted their eyes from telescopes, and children looked up at the night sky with a quiet awe. Something had changed, something profound, something that transcended technology, politics, or even gravity. Earth had been moved, yes, but more than that, Earth had been elevated, brought to a place where humanity's improbable survival was recognized, validated, and integrated into a purpose far beyond any individual's comprehension. Inside the fleet, the crew of the Daring Light began to experience the expanse in ways that defied explanation. The pulse of the constructs grew stronger, threading through neural interfaces, resonating with the human brain in patterns that expanded cognition. Every thought, every memory, every intuitive leap became amplified, connected not only to their own minds, but to one another. Dr. Lyra Vance found herself recalling moments from humanity's history, moments that had seemed isolated and insignificant, but now understood as threads in a larger design. Wars, discoveries, explorations, collapses, and renaissances were not random. They were the forging of a species capable of interacting meaningfully with the fabric of the galaxy. Humanity had been prepared without knowing it, and now the expanse was revealing why. Captain Rourke watched in awe as the first tangible manifestation of the expanse's intent became visible. The crystalline towers aligned into a massive circular formation around the fleet, forming what could only be described as a cathedral of light and geometry. The beams of the lattice connected to each other and to the fleet itself, creating a web that shimmered with information. The intelligence behind the expanse had always been there, dormant, waiting for a species capable of perceiving its design. Now it was awake, and humanity, improbably, was the one it had chosen. The communication was no longer indirect. Knowledge flowed directly into the minds of the crew. It revealed the history of the expanse, a region deliberately created by an intelligence older than most galaxies, designed to house, observe, and cultivate outlier species, those that defied the natural order, that survived against impossible odds. Humans were one such outlier. Their movement to this region was not punishment, not relocation as a tool of war, but restoration. The intelligence had recognized humanity's resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity, and it had moved Earth so that the species could fulfill its latent potential. Fleet-wide comprehension unfolded slowly, like dawn breaking over a vast ocean. Humans understood, at once, that they had passed the first test simply by surviving. Every extinction, every leap of innovation, every moment of defiance against overwhelming odds had been observed, catalogued, and noted. They were now in a place where their choices could ripple through the expanse itself, where their ingenuity and courage would be amplified, and where their collective consciousness could interact with the structures around them in ways that no other species had ever attempted. The human fleet advanced into the heart of the formation. The crystalline towers responded, extending bridges of light toward the ships. These bridges were not physical in the conventional sense. They were constructs of energy, probability, and thought, capable of connecting minds across vast distances. Crew members stepped onto them, feeling a sensation unlike walking, flying, or floating. They were being invited to participate, to explore, to integrate. The expanse was not a place to conquer, it was a place to learn, to become part of a system that transcended individual comprehension. Meanwhile, on Earth, people felt the shift in subtle ways. Oceans rose and fell in perfect synchrony with the patterns of the expanse. Storms, winds, and tectonic movements obeyed a rhythm invisible to instruments, but palpable to humans who were aware enough to notice. Civilization, in its myriad forms, became part of the pulse. Humans realized, collectively, that their species' actions, thoughts, and decisions now had a resonance that extended beyond their planet, beyond their solar system, into the very architecture of the galaxy itself. Captain Rourke, standing on the bridge as the fleet integrated with the crystalline network, finally spoke aloud. "We've arrived, not just in space, but in purpose. We were moved because we were meant to be here, and now we step forward." Every crew member felt the weight of those words. They were no longer explorers merely observing alien structures. They were participants, co-creators, witnesses, and shapers of a living, conscious system older than the stars. Humanity had been brought to the frontier of its own destiny. The pulse intensified, connecting minds, memories, and Earth itself. For the first time in the galaxy, the silent expanse was alive with humanity's presence. And in that unity, in that recognition, it became clear. The galaxy had shifted. The map had redrawn itself. And Earth was no longer a solitary world drifting in ordinary space. It was the center of a nexus, the heart of a design in which humanity had been chosen not for its strength, nor its weapons, nor its technology, but for its resilience, adaptability, and audacity. The audacity to endure, to defy, and to rise. Dr. Vance whispered into the comms, her voice trembling with awe. "We've been moved, but not against our will. We've been welcomed. We're not pawns. We're participants." The fleet, the planet, the species, they all resonated together, a symphony of consciousness now threading through the expanse itself. Humanity had crossed the threshold. The frontier had become theirs. And as the silent expanse pulsed in recognition, Captain Rourke knew with certainty the galaxy could shift its boundaries, redraw its maps, and challenge its species. But humanity would endure. Humanity would thrive. Humanity would rise. Earth had been moved. Humanity had arrived. And the universe would never be the same again.